Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this edition of Defense News Weekly, we'll look at the impact recent deployments have had on the Army's network development, find out where the Navy's shipbuilding plans stand, see the Marine Corps' first F-35C deploy, and hear directly from the Army's Chief of Staff. With in-depth interviews, up-close video, and leading analysis, this is Defense News Weekly. Welcome to this week's edition of Defense News Weekly. I'm Jeff Martin. We've got an incredibly busy show for you this week, looking at a bunch of different topics. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Up first, the U.S. Marine Corps' first F-35C squadron has welcomed their first aircraft to Marine Corps Air Station Miramar in California. Check out this video of the aircraft landing at the station, where it will be assigned to VMFA 314, the Black Knights. Now that squadron was also the first many years ago to transition to the FA-18 Hornet. The Marine Corps plans to equip several squadrons with the C-model Joint Strike Fighters, where it will operate both from land and from the Navy's aircraft carriers. They'll also be operated alongside the Corps' B-model fighters, based on both the East and West coasts. And negotiations are almost complete for Poland's buy of 32 F-35 Joint Strike Fighters. At least that's according to the Polish defense minister. In a radio interview, the minister said that the first aircraft would be delivered in likely 2024, and other sources say the deal could be worth up to $4 billion. Now, Poland would be the first Eastern European country to operate the jet, and they would supplement Poland's 48-strong F-16 fleet. And the U.S. Navy's first Bell-Boeing CMV-22B Osprey, designed to replace C-2 Greyhound aircraft carrier onboard delivery aircraft, has flown for the first time from Bell's facility in Amarillo. Now, this aircraft will be delivered to Test and Evaluation Squadron 21 later this year, where it will work to qualify it on carriers to be done. The Navy plans to buy about 40 of them, and they'll be based on both coasts to support the fleet. The first deployment is set for around 2021. And the U.S. Air Force has successfully finished their first field test of the Experimental Advanced Battle Management System in December, with 26 of 28 capabilities tested showing some semblance of functionality, at least according to the service's acquisition chief, Dr. Will Roper. The test took place at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida and involved a potential cruise missile attack. It featured Air Force F-22s, F-35s from multiple services, a Navy destroyer, Army rocket artillery, and special operators from across the military, along with other elements. The Air Force also demonstrated the ability for cloud-based command and control, as well as several other capabilities. So at any one time, there's always a brigade of the 82nd Airborne Division ready to deploy at a moment's notice. And recently, they did just that, heading to Iraq and Kuwait. But what happens when the Alert Brigade was also set to be the test unit for the Army's new Integrated Tactical Network? Well, according to the Army's Program Executive Officer for that effort, Major General Dave Bassett, the service now plans to use a series of events to validate the system before deploying to 4 brigades in 2021, rather than a single big test where the final strategy isn't exactly set. Bassett says this is the final refinement of the ITN before it deploys to the field full-time. And the German military has contracted with Rheinmetall to carry out work to modernize Marder 1A5 infantry fighting vehicles. The work will focus on modernizing the drivetrains and will cost about 110 million euros. The Cold War-era Marder is being replaced by Puma fighting vehicles, but the Marder is set to remain in service with the German Army for several more years to come. And the U.S. Navy says they're now going to commission all of their new Expeditionary Sea Base ships as warships, rather than support ships, which would allow them to not just transport forces, but actually employ them as well. Now, the first of those ships, the USS Lewis B. Polar, will be joined soon by the Woody Williams and the Miguel Keith. The Navy plans to use the 3 ships for everything from mine countermeasures to special operations basing to helicopter operations anywhere in the world. Now, the Polar is already deployed to the Middle East, where she arrived in 2017. And General Atomics has announced that they recently wrapped up a round of demonstrations to show that the MQ-1C Grey Eagle drone's abilities to support long-range precision fires efforts as a targeting system. Now, using internal funding, the company equipped a Grey Eagle with a Lynx advanced targeting system, which can spot targets up to 75 kilometers away. Things like this are a key part of the Army's work to develop multi-domain capabilities, especially using aircraft like the Grey Eagle. Now, as we get closer to the fiscal year 2021 budget being released, the military service chiefs are making the rounds to emphasize their needs. Now, this week, the Army's Chief of Staff, General James McConville, spoke to the Association of the U.S. Army about what he's focusing on.
The Army needs help from our soldiers, our non-commissioned officers, our officers. We need help from our civilians. We need help from our industry partners, our allies and partners in achieving transformational change. Not so much of this, but more of this. And, you know, we need transformational change, not incremental improvements. That's what an incremental improvement looks like. And because transformational change is how we get overmatch and how we get dominance in the future. It's how we compete. It's how we deter great power competitors. And if required, it's how we win on the future battlefield. And as we pursue the kind of transformational change I'm describing, it's important that we can't be constrained by our experiences. Experience is important. It's great. But sometimes new and different perspectives are necessary for innovation. And though that innovation may come from a colonel, may come from a general, it might also come from a lieutenant, or sergeant, or someone from industry or academia, or a combination of many. So we have to encourage innovation, look for it in unexpected places, and we must embrace it when we find it. But take the M2 Bradley, one of our key fighting vehicles. Over the last 40 years, we've upgraded the Bradley to the M2A1 and then incrementally improved it to one version after another. We added improved armor. We increased the power capabilities. We upgraded our night vision sights, and we made many other improvements. And although the Bradley is a very formidable infantry fighting vehicle, I can't say that 40 years from now, it'll be the centerpiece of our mechanized infantry formations. We are reaching the limits of technology and designs we developed back in the 1970s. We can only add so much weight to some of our combat vehicles. We can only make our current helicopters fly so fast and so far. You know, I think it's very, very important that one of the reasons we went to cross-functional teams is we want to bring operators, we want to bring technologists, and we want to bring acquisition professionals all together. And we want to move away from the linear industrial age process that we used in the past that would take us 3 to 5 years to get a requirement straight, and then we'd go through the acquisition process, take 3 to 5 years, maybe requesting for proposals, and then getting a program under contract, and then would take 5 to 7 years later to field that program. And after billions of dollars of expenditure, you may have something that is no longer relevant. So what we're trying to do is bring people together early in the process. And some people are not as comfortable with this as they should be, but they're getting that way because that's how we're going to do business. And what we're trying to show is the value of working together early in the process with everybody involved. And I think what you're going to see, and even during this tactical pause, is I've been with our acquisition professionals, I've been with Futures Command, and they understand the importance of working together. They're going to reset. Like if there was a football game, they're going back in the huddle. They're going to call another play, and they're going to come out to the line of scrimmage, and they're going to get after it, and they're going to score a touchdown. So this is going to happen.
And as the Navy gets closer to fielding unmanned ships sometime this decade, there are still a lot of questions about the concept. But that isn't stopping DARPA from doing their own work. To break things down, we got my colleague David Larter to explain. Here's what he had to say.
So DARPA is creating a ship designed from the keel up to operate without human beings on board. This is going to be probably in the medium size, maybe 100 feet max, vessel that will operate autonomously on its own, off doing its own missions, and will come back only for maintenance, maybe once a year, something along those lines. So Sea Hunter was released a few years ago, and it seems like from the solicitation that DARPA put out, you're looking at something similar to Sea Hunter, only Sea Hunter is what you would call optionally manned, and you can actually put people on it to do some limited functions. This ship is going to be designed for no mariners, no people, no human being. There are two main advantages to this. One is that if it gets blown up by the Chinese or the Russians in a war, you don't necessarily have to send any tearful letters home. The other main advantage is that you don't have to build in any of the crew accommodations that you would. You don't have to build a galley, you don't have to build an at-sea septic system, you don't have to build hallways. All of these things that you can avoid, that makes them pretty cheap. Some of the disadvantages, gosh, what if your system breaks, right? What if the engine you designed to be super reliable As we learned in the space program and in other places, sometimes the best engineering and best designers overlook things, and that can lead to your very expensive drone ship floating off the waters of Hainan Island and being right there for the Chinese to just go pick it up because it broke down, and what are we going to just ask for that back?
What does it mean for hull design?
That's what I'm really excited to find out, because nobody has really done much of this before. There's been some prototypes, there's been some things out there, but this is really a blank slate for designers. They're being asked by DARPA to think outside the box, as DARPA is known to do, and come up with something that is optimized for efficiency without human beings. So what that looks like, who knows? We'll find out together. I don't know if we would ever put missiles on there. It seems like there's a potential for that to be a bad idea. That starts getting into the realm of policy. Right now, DoD wouldn't permit such a thing unless a human being was there to say yay or nay on a firing solution. Or it could be somebody off board on another ship that's monitoring it, either on the loop or in the loop with this drone ship, right? It sounds like from the solicitation, DARPA's looking for something to just go out there and do its thing and then, call home when it's got something. Where we go from here is the industry partners that are interested in this kind of crazy idea will go back and they'll get all their minds together. Eventually they'll put forward proposals. If DARPA likes their proposal, they'll find some funding for a few prototypes, and then it'll go from there. Maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. And I think overall, I think what we need to keep in mind about these unmanned ships is that they're very much experimental. We don't know if they're going to work yet. We don't know if this whole ConOps works. It relies on an exquisite communications network that we always keep up we're managed to change crypto so that it doesn't get hacked on a daily basis. And so there's a lot of things to work out with these ships. So I think DARPA is certainly leading the way in terms of the prototypes and the concepts for these things. But again, we don't know if they're going to work yet.
To keep up to date with all of our coverage, be sure to visit our Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn pages. Also, be sure to add us on Apple's News app and other platforms for the latest updates. Now, when we come back, we're going to look at the Navy's shipbuilding plan and some changes coming to the Marine Corps. Recently, at the Service Navy Association's annual meeting, the Navy's acquisition chief laid out where things stand in his view as many major programs continue to work out their kinks. Here's what he told the audience.
Really one job for the Department of Navy, right? I turn dollars and requirements, right, into equipment and services. And at the end of the day, my job is to figure out with the awesome team we have in the Department of Navy how to do that so we maximize every dollar, right? So we maximize every minute of time we have available, and how we maximize every person that's in the enterprise, whether it's on the government side or in the industrial base, or out there in the fleet, quite frankly. And so the first kind of year was mostly get everything oriented and get that culture back of focusing on delivery. And so our challenge, you've heard the CNO speak, if Secretary Miley were up here, he'd be telling you, now how do we balance all those? If we're a very ready force, but we have no ability to put next generation capabilities on quickly, that force will be irrelevant at some point. If we put all our money against new capability and ship count and hollow out the force, right? So if any one of those products are zero, right, we failed. And so the art is, one, getting things in balance, and then two, working across the cost for each one of those, right, through new ways of doing business, new relationships, new technology, whatever it is, so that we can rise the tide in all three and not be forced with a draconian trade between one or two or three. We are more ready, but that came at a price. So we've got to look for ingenious ways to look at achieving that readiness through all sorts of different methods so we can have the dollars to modernize and bring new construction out. It's easy to do each individual thing. If you look at the Department of the Navy and Marine Corps, it's quite fascinating. There is not an element I can think of in the Navy and the Marine Corps that isn't in a rapid recapitalization modernization cycle. Right? Aircraft carriers. right? Moving to a first new class of aircraft carriers in 50 years. Submarines, strategic deterrence, aviation, amphibious vehicles, ground radars. There is not an element where we don't have them. And the challenge, right? Doing each one of those individually is hard. Doing them all simultaneously, right, is a heck of a lot of fun, right? Because we got an awesome team and we got a really hard problem. And there's no better place to be in the world than having really talented folks working on really hard problems. We are not going to deliver for the nation a national defense strategy just doing the way we did business before a little bit better, right? And you know, having very transactional processes that you just make a little bit more efficient 1 or 2% at a time. That's not going to get us here, right? That's where we've all got to work together.
Now, many of those programs that Geurts referred to there are ships. So later on in the event, the Navy's Program Executive Officer for Ships laid out where things are in his department and what's ahead.
Just real quickly, kind of around the portfolio, let me start with the DDG 51 class, which, you know, again, continues to make great strides. The ship is in stable production. We're building Flight 2A ships right now in both shipyards. We're going to deliver 119 here early next year, and then 118 up at Bath, you know, probably a little bit later in the year. So, again, both yards, stable production on the Flight 2A. The Flight 3 program, 20 is a big year for the Flight 3 program, okay? You know, we're really heavily into the integration efforts, the land-based integration efforts at Philadelphia, where we're delivering a lot of the power components. That's everything from generators to switch gears and switchboards. And then at the Combat Systems Engineering Development Center in Morristown, a lot of the radar and a lot of the combat system components are coming together. So a big year from that perspective. We laid the keel for the first Flight 3 ship on the Gulf Coast at Ingalls last November. That ship is now about 30% complete, and you know, the production work is going very well down there on the first Flight 3 on the Gulf Coast, and we'll lay the keel for the second Flight 3 up in Bath later this year. So again, the DDG 51 program continues to make good progress. DDG 1000, again, you know, 3-ship program, as I mentioned. I don't think it's any secret, you know, the combat system activation availability for DDG 1000 was hard, and to the credit of BAE and the Navy waterfront team in San Diego, we got through that early last year, and the ship is now well into the combat system test effort, well over 60% of that. But again, you know, working through a first-time integration of a complex combat system, the hardware and the software on the ship, really for the first time, you know, really kind of gives you some insight to the dividends of doing a lot of the land-based integration work that we're doing on the 51, and that, quite frankly, is envisioned for the large surface combatant when we get to that piece. That being said, the team continues to make good progress. The ship was underway quite a bit last year in 2019. If you heard Captain Smith talk yesterday, along with the CEO from 1000, they talked a lot about what the ship did. We're on track to deliver 1000 this spring. You know, the challenges continue to be with the combat system test effort and getting through that integration piece, but you know, the team continues to make good progress there. 1001 going through her combat system activation avail in San Diego, and again, night and day from 1000 to 1001, and the team has done an absolutely tremendous job of rolling a lot of lessons learned in, and we're on track to complete that avail again early this spring. We'll get her back to sea and start lighting off and testing her combat system as well. And then 1002 is kind of in the final stages of construction. We expect to take her to trials here later this year with the delivery, most likely probably in early calendar year 2021. So again, you know, that's a platform that continues to make good progress, brings a lot of capability to the Navy. It's providing Navy leadership, I'll say, with a lot of options in terms of, you know, potential future capability and mission sets. I think everybody knows, you know, a few years ago we changed the mission set for that platform from a land attack destroyer to a surface strike mission, and we're incorporating that capability on that platform as we go forward. On the amphibious ship side, you know, the LPD-17 class, we've completely transitioned now to the Flight 2. So, LPD 28 and 29 in construction on the Gulf Coast. 30 is on contract and getting ready to start construction. That LPD 30 is the first absolutely true Flight 2 baseline ship. 28 and 29, we kind of refer to those ships as transition ships as we were making that transition from the Flight 1s to the Flight 2s. And we're getting ready right now we're in the contracting phase for LPD 31 with Ingalls at this point, and so we're working through that. On the large deck amphib side, LHA-7 Tripoli completed a very successful acceptance trial late last fall in the October timeframe. The ship performed very well, and we're on track to deliver that ship here early this year. So, and the big game changer for that, what that ship really brings to the fleet, that will be the first amphib designed and built with the Joint Strike Fighter capability included, and that really is a game changer. America LHA-6 arrived in Japan late last year. She was backfitted with the Joint Strike Fighter after ship delivery. So 7's the first one that will be delivered with that full capability. So, and we'll see that now in the follow-on ships. LHA-8 is in construction and doing very well. And we expect this year we'll start the contracting approach or the contracting process rather for LHA-9. So we're moving forward on that.
So when we come back, we're going to look at the changing role of the Marine Corps and what it means for that service. On this week's Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack offers her latest tips.
If your wallet has the post-holiday blues, you're not alone. According to a Navy Federal survey, 42% of the military and their families used a credit card to cover their holiday spending this season. And 47% said it would take anywhere from 1 to 6 months to pay it off. It could be time for a balance transfer. By now, maybe you know a balance transfer can consolidate your high credit card debt onto one lower rate card, most of the time lowering your monthly bill while reducing the hassle of paying multiple cards. But do you know how to choose one? Look for a transfer offer with a low intro rate and no transfer fees. And pay attention to the fine print because not all offers are the same. If there's a deadline to pay off your transferred balance, you'll want to be sure you can actually do it because the rate will likely increase after that. And about that new rate, make sure it's a good one too. You don't want to go back to paying sky-high rates or you'll be back where you started. The point is to bring your debt down and amp up your credit score. That means maintaining good habits once you've paid off your balance transfer. With a good payoff plan and the right deal, it'll be easy.
Hey, thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more defense news coverage, be sure to visit our website at defensenews.com and subscribe to our Early Bird Brief, delivered to your inbox every weekday morning to get you ready to start the day. Now, when we come back, we're going to look at the changing role of the Marine Corps and what it means for that service. As the Marine Corps switches from fighting a largely static counterinsurgency fight in Iraq and Afghanistan, the service is working to improve their amphibious capabilities. Here's what that will mean in the future.
It's very clear to me, it's crystal clear, and for those of us who've worn the uniform for a while, that's a pretty rare thing. And the stuff we're getting from the Commandant, I understand. Aye, Commandant, I understand. I'm one of the few Marines who's had the opportunity and experience to conduct several amphibious ops. The Philippines, Thailand, Iwo Jima several times, Korea, several times here stateside, and believe it or not, a division-sized landing up in Newfoundland when I was a captain. Unfortunately, there are fewer and fewer Marines who have spent significant time on board Lima-class ships serving as part of an expeditionary force. I believe earlier today one of the questions alluded to that fact. I just said unfortunately. Let me explain. 2 decades of war have granted the Marine Corps unprecedented levels of experience and irreplaceable combat experience, but we're paying a price for it. Think about the character of the past 2 conflicts: coin-specific, land-centric, steady-state ops. Simply put, our amphib skills have atrophied. From Lance Corporal to Gunnery Sergeant, Lieutenant to Major, our Marines have numerous combat deployments but very few days on ship. We're getting after that, and I can't thank the CNO enough. Okay, a little bit of trivia. How many amphib ships did we possess on 7 December 1941? 0, right? How many did we use during Operation Chromite when we came ashore and cut the North Korean Army in half? 231, 91 of which were defined as what we would commonly refer to as Lima class. All to land a couple of regiments for the purpose that remains a constant during even today's ops, the introduction of follow-on forces. That's what your Marine Corps does for you. Chromite's design was to use a Marine division to get 10th Corps into the fight at a time and place of our choosing. Yesterday, we fought as an extension of the fleet that cut the North Korean army in half. Tomorrow, we may fight as an extension of the fleet's control of the seas. I fully expect that to happen. In fact, during the last 20 years, the same 20 years we've been ashore in the Middle East, combatant commander requests for naval forces with the Marines have continued to increase.
Now, as we close out the show this week, let's check out this awesome video from the folks out at Edwards Air Force Base. Last weekend, jets from the 416th and 418th Flight Test Squadrons performed an impressive flyover for the NFC Championship game in California, displaying some pretty precision formation flying. This video is taken from the boom of a KC-135 and shows just how close those aircraft were. And that's all we have time for this week. But if you want to see and read more, be sure to head over to defensenews.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.